Security. When do you want to force a user to change their password? Every year? 6 months? Go ahead and choose what you'd like. And then an idle time before AdvancedMD automatically boots you out of the system or locks you out. Now you can use your screensaver on your Windows XP Professional or Windows Vista, but this is always a good backup here. 15 minutes, a couple hours. Go ahead and make your changes. Transaction entry. Sales tax. Do you have any procedure codes that you'd like to apply a sales tax to? Now you can watch the training videos on setting up your procedure codes, and each procedure code you enter in, you can check a little box whether or not you want to pull sales tax to it, and here's the percent you would type in where it would pull from. You can type in 6, 7%. Require batches. First, what is a batch? You can watch the training video on batches, but in short, a batch is something that will record all the user's payments, charges, and write-offs that they post in the system. Now, this forces a biller or a user to open up a batch so it can record that. In theory, what it's supposed to do is, let's say you have 3 or 4 or 5 billers. Well, if one of the billers makes a mistake or doesn't collect the right amount of money or post the incorrect charges, it's hard to find out which biller did that. But if you have a recording for each biller or a batch, then they can narrow that down and say, well, biller XYZ over here missed this payment, didn't collect it, so we can narrow that down. And all this does is, when you say yes, is it forces, again, a biller to open up a batch so they can record their actions as far as posting charges, payments, and write-offs. Default aging. Now, this is different from the aging we talked about in reports, because reports will give us an overall view of what happened and when. Do we want to view a report by date of service or by date of entry? Here is the actual transaction entry. Do we want it to do by date of service? All that means is that our aging is based on when we actually post the charge. That's it. However, if you choose date of entry, what that means is that when you post a charge, it starts that day, the aging. However, that aging can be reset back to 0 the moment you post a payment, versus the date of service. When you post a payment, it'll always be that day that you post the charge. For example, let's say that our aging began January 1st, and let's say the patient hasn't paid and the aging begins. By date of entry, let's say February 15th, about 45 days or so later, the patient makes a payment, a partial payment. The aging automatically gets reset back to 0, where if it was date of service, they'd still be at 45, 46 days, and it'll keep counting. Generate visit number automatically. When you schedule a patient, a visit number is automatically generated, but yet you get the option here of yes and no. This has nothing to do with when you schedule a patient, because it will automatically generate a visit number for you. Well, what is a visit number? What it does is that every claim that you send out of AdvancedMD has to have a visit number, because that's what the insurance carrier uses to help identify the patient. And in fact, when you get the EOB back, it'll have that visit number on there. Of course, the insurance carrier will call it a claim ID number. So what you can do is you can type in that claim ID number in the system here and automatically pull that patient up. That's very efficient, because let's say you get an EOB with 10 people with the last name of Smith. That gets annoying when you're trying to match dates of births and everything. Visit number narrows it down to a T. So if it has nothing to do with the scheduler, that we have no control over it, what is this option for? Let's say that the doctor works at a hospital and you don't schedule patients for him. Well, how do you generate a visit number? You do it by going to the charge entry or quick charge entry screens, and there's training videos on entering in charges. In those screens, and I'll show you one of them here, I'm going to go up to the top and click on the quick charge entry button here. You see this button here, it's faded. It's the visit number button. Now by default, it'll pull up today's date. If I say no, I don't want it to automatically generate a date for me and a number, then I actually have to click on the button to generate it. Sure, it's an extra click, but it's up to you. And that visit number has to go out on every claim, otherwise you can't bill it out. So, do you want to automatically have that visit number and that date generate for you, or do you want to be able to click on that button and do it manually? Default referral standard episode. Well, first of all, what's a standard episode? In AdvancedMD, a standard episode just basically means that the initial visit that the patient's being seen by the doctor for, by a typical visit. And another episode would be something like, or outside of the standard would be like for car insurance or workman's comp. So, what we're saying here is, do you want the default referral as self or oldest valid? In other words, do you want the oldest active referral or self-referral attached to the standard episode? Most offices choose self, and what that means is that for a standard visit, The self-referral is usually the doctor, the patient's a walk-in, it's not from any other referrals. Or, do you get so many referrals in your system, do you want it to be default to the oldest valid referral, whoever that may be? Still talking about referrals, how long do you want your old referrals to continue to display in the referral screen? 0 days or up to 1 year? Facility. You want to watch a training video on facilities before you set this up here, but basically this field's not going to be used unless you have an off-site facility from your main place of service with an ID that the provider is going to be spending most of his time at and posting charges from. Using coordination of benefit codes or COB codes, yes or no? In general, most states don't use it, but if you use Medicare's coordination of benefits, then mark it yes to print in box 24J of the HCFA. To learn more about it, you can go to this website here. And to set up your COB codes, you can go down to transaction codes and then over and up to your COB codes. Automatically apply copay when charge is posted. What that means is that if the front office collects a copay before the doctor can actually see the patient and the biller posts the charges, that copay is going to be sitting there as an unapplied or a credit. Advanced MD calls it an unapplied amount to the patient, and it's not going to any data service until the doctor actually posts the charges for that day that you collected the copay. Then the moment they post the charge, the doctor or the biller, it automatically sucks right to that copay, and then that way you don't have to go back and manually say, well, this copay goes to this data service. So most offices say yes. Use payment note lookup. Selecting yes will allow you to create and make defaulted notes that later you can use to select from when you're posting payments that will actually print on the patient statements. Claim Inspector edits enabled. If you're paying for it, you probably want to select yes. In other words, if you're using Nginx to scrub your claims here called the Claim Inspector module, then you want to leave that as yes. Anesthesia, minutes per unit, go ahead and set up your units. Scroll down here. Default institutional provider, that's working with UB92. We'll leave that. Default provider and referring provider and charge entry. If you say yes, that means when posting charges in the patient charge entry screen, to default their main provider and referring provider in corresponding fields if there are any referring providers. Otherwise, if you set this to no, then you'll manually have to put in the default provider and if there is a referring provider. Include therapy-related evaluation fields. And finally, transaction history. Do you want to auto-filter transaction history, yes or no? Let me go to the patient demographics. Go to the History tab and pull up a patient, and you can see in the upper right-hand corner, I don't have to be on the home page here. I can be on any one of these pages and just type in the first couple letters of the patient's last name, hit the tab key, and if that's the only patient with the first 3 letters of the last name, HEF or Heffernan, then it automatically pulls. So what it's saying in the system default when you want to auto-filter the history is that you can see that the patient column here, it has a balance, except some of these fields don't, but where it doesn't have a balance, the insurance has a balance. So wherever there's a balance, do you want to be able to see it? Do you want to filter just for the balance? Because this patient, I'll guarantee you, has many more charges. If we say all items and click reload, I mean, there's tons. And you can always do that. You're just saying initially by default, do you want to see everything or just open items and click reload? Just by default, just those that have a balance, either patient balance or insurance balance. That's all it means here for system defaults, because you can always override it. Most offices say yes, they just want to see what the patient has due, either by insurance or whatever balance the patient has open. The number of charges displayed per page, just in that screen that we just closed out of, if there's 30 charges, we just probably only want to see 20 per page. Or you can click on the drop-down arrow and say 30 or 40. Now, if the page history, because it's not just charges, you can actually have payments in there, write-offs, voids. If the overall history gets up to 20 line items, do you want to be able to go to a second page, third page, fourth page, or do you want to say after 40 line items, go ahead and make another page or dump over to the second page? 20 is pretty good for me. And then display charges voided prior to day close. In other words, do you want to see the voided charges appear on the patient history tab, that screen that we were just in, and also on your batch report? If you do, then go ahead and select yes. Some offices don't like seeing voids because some of them say it junks up the screen in the report, but a lot of them like it, so I'm going to go ahead and go with the majority, I think, and say yes. When you're done with everything here in all your categories, go ahead and click Save, and it'll save everything for you.